Well, it's 6 in the morning, and I'm coming to you from a hotel in Alabama. And man, it brings back memories of being on the road. And you've got a light over there that occasionally flashes, and you can hear the people above every now and then. But man, life on the road, living out of a suitcase, what we had to do, back in the day, back in the time of, when I was a road dog. And man, I've stayed in 1,000+ hotel rooms. And, now that I'm older and seemingly retired from the music business, but full on with YouTube, there'll be less and less of this. But man, I'm very thankful to be here. And people who watch this channel know it's because I'm taping an episode of the X5 podcast. Man, I am super pumped for that. It is going to be an awesome experience, and man, it's just a great opportunity. I'm very thankful to them for doing that. But being out here traveling, going on the road, so to speak, it's like yesterday. I had to get up, drive to the airport. It was an airport I had never been to before, at least departing from before, as a civilian. I'm sure I've flown in and out of that airport a million times, but driving it there, being a resident now of the Tampa area, driving there, that was a whole different experience. Normally it'd be somebody driving me and dropping me off and just, navigating the airport on my own. But, we flew to Atlanta, and that was fine. Got there, everything was cool. And then we got to Birmingham. We got to Atlanta, right? And the next flight was to Birmingham. And everything was cool, everything was flowing, and we were set to basically get off the plane, get in a vehicle, and then drive straight to the podcast and do the podcast. But, and my experience on the road has often told me that, flying in the day of was always a risk. And I've done hundreds and hundreds of fly dates on the road. And if you don't know what a fly date is when you would fly in to a location and basically go do a gig. And that would involve, you would use backline amps. So everything was basically provided except for your guitar, except for your pedals. If you're a drummer, there'd be a drum set there for you. If you're a bass player, they'd have a bass amp, they'd have a keyboard, all of that. But all of that advancing the date. They call it advancing the date. And I have experience advancing fly dates. So what you would do is you would pass on to the promoter. Okay, we've got this date on such and such. We've got this gig on such and such a date. You're the promoter. You're going to have to provide these items. And you would send a stage plot, and you would send the requirements. Here's the amps we need. Here's this and that. Now, if you're an experienced road guy, I've toured with guys that weren't experienced, and when they were told, okay, tell us what amps you need, and then they would ask for, I want a Bogner Ecstasy, and I want, it's like, no, dude, no. You've got to ask for the common garden variety amps, and maybe you would get, you probably wouldn't get a Bogner out of a rental company, but you would be able to get twin reverbs. You would be able to get deluxe reverbs. You would be able to get Marshalls, JCM 800s, super leads, those kind of things. They may have PV 5150s back in the day. They probably now have maybe the EVH amps. It's been a while since I've done a fly date and advanced a backline, but one of the rules that I always used was have whatever amp you're going to use, always ask for two. Why do you ask for two? You ask for two because the first one that they bring might have an issue. It might not work. Rental amps are not maintained oftenly as well as you would maintain your own personal amp. They're rode hard and put up wet. So if the gig, required a twin reverb, I would always ask for two. And I would be prepared to run stereo. And that way, and why would I run stereo when, mostly what you're doing is mono guitar signals? Well, all I would do to do that is use a delay pedal with 2 outs. And then whenever I kicked in the delay pedal, there'd be stereo delays, but essentially it's a mono signal that I'm sending. But the reason why I would run them both at the same time, one, it does sound really cool when you step on that delay pedal and you get some ping pong or some stereo effect kind of going, or maybe you're using a stereo modulation effect and then it becomes a stereo modulation. That's a super cool sound. But I would always run both amps at the same time because look, these gigs are scheduled. You go on stage at 7 o'clock, you play till 8 o'clock, that's it. There's no, oh, my amp doesn't work. Let's wait and see if we can fix it. There's none of that. So you play the show, and no matter what happens, if your amp is dying, you've got to get through the gig. And I've had instances where pedals have broken or whatever. If something's going on with the pedal board, I just bypass the whole thing and go straight into the amp. Play the whole gig straight into a twin reverb. Not an easy thing to do, especially if you have to use overdriven tones. That could possess its own problems. But always run both amps at the same time. And if one of them goes down during the show, you just turn that one off and run the rest of the show on the one amp. That way, there's nothing stopping you from playing your show, and everybody gets paid, everybody does their job, and gets out of there. Then the other thing to consider, flying in the day of the show, just like we had yesterday. I get to Atlanta, I get on the plane, everything's cool, everything's kosher, and it looks like we're going to be on time and all that, and all of a sudden we get on the runway and there's an issue with the plane. And so I'm looking at the clock. I know we've got once I get to Birmingham, we've got an hour drive to the venue of the podcast. And I know that, this is going to be cutting it close. Fortunately, the podcast was flexible and said, okay, we're going to reschedule for tomorrow at noon. So today we're going to shoot the podcast that we were going to do yesterday afternoon, late evening. Early evening. So, that's something to consider, man. If you're doing fly dates, we are always, now if you have to do the gig on the same day as you're flying in, you try to book the earliest flight, and that means, man, getting up at like 4 a.m, being at the airport at 6 a.m, and trying to get there, by 10 or 11 o'clock. And that allows you enough time to get there, perhaps check into the hotel early, maybe get a little rest before sound check. Just giving yourself some extra time to be able to do what you need to be able to do. But the reality is, man, it's, being on the road is never an easy thing. It can be a very difficult thing. There's usually, there's the Murphy Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And your best bet is to be prepared for any situation, that can happen. And like yesterday, I knew there was a potential there wasn't really time between going from the airport to run to the hotel to get ready for the podcast. So I was dressed to get off the plane and go and do my job. And the same thing can be said, man. You know, when I would go do gigs in Nashville, and the gigs would require, you know, wearing all black or whatever, I would go to the gig basically dressed, ready to go. That all I needed to do was throw on my shirt, throw on a jacket, or whatever type gig it was, and I could go right on stage. And the same thing would be with doing these travel dates. You know, you're gotta be ready to go at any time. You know that, man, things can happen, flights can get delayed, you know, weather issues can happen, and you have to be prepared, whether it's with your gear or with yourself. Always have extra cables, always have extra strings. I would generally travel with 2 guitars, for that matter. And sometimes on the back line, we'd ask for an extra guitar. That way, you know, if there's an issue, there's a standard Strat or something sitting, waiting in the wings. But don't count on backline guitars being great. They usually have rusty strings. They're usually been rode hard and put up wet. And a guitar is more of a personal instrument that you're going to be holding in your hands. So don't rely on a backline guitar. But, you know, as far as dates go, you know, fly dates, I think for me, were pretty enjoyable. But, you know, you do end up staying in hotels like I am now and living out of a suitcase. You know, when I was a kid, I used to love hotels. I used to go, you know, with my grandma, and we'd drive to Florida, and halfway on the trip, we'd get in a hotel, and I thought it was just amazing. They had those old, the magic fingers. Does anybody remember that? Let me know in the comments. You'd put a quarter in the mattress, and the mattress would vibrate. Now, I'm sure if I was, if I was of the dating age at that time, that would have perhaps had a different use. But I was just a young kid, and I just absolutely loved the little plastic cups, the cups with the little plastic, wrap around them, and going down to the ice machine, and we'd go to the soda machine, and you get a soda, you know, and all that. And I used to just absolutely love staying in hotels. And, you know, now that I'm older, I've stayed in thousands of them. And it's not something, you know, I tell my wife, I said, you know, is the hotel nicer than our house? And 9 times out of 10, it's not. And I say, you know, I like where we're at now, and I like the stability of being in a home. But, you know, there is a certain nostalgia for being on the road, living out of a hotel. You know, imagine playing for thousands of people and hearing those screams and everybody cheering and just the high of coming off stage, but then coming back to a silent and quiet hotel room. That's the reality of being on the road.